Greetings and welcome to the March edition of Book Blast. I'm Nikki Gamble and I'm recording this edition from the Bologna Children's Book Fair. Now we've got a lot to get through in this edition, so it's going to be something of a whistle-stop tour. I've also got a bit of a dry throat, so I'll probably be taking some sips of water as we go through the presentation this evening. Now, let's have a quick look, and here we go. Just before we start, all of the books that are mentioned in this presentation are available from bestbooksforschools.com. So if you see anything that you like and you are considering purchasing them, then you can support our work by buying books from Best Books for Schools. But let's move straight on. And I'm starting with Picturebooks as usual. And now out in paperback, Rose Robbins Loud from Scallywag Press. Rose is well established now as a picture book creator with her unique, expressive visual style, which is instantly recognizable. Her neurodiverse characters elicit empathy, and there is much in these stories for both children and adults to learn from. Abigail is restless. She can't keep still, and it annoys her classmates. They just don't understand. As Rose says, Abigail likely has a diagnosis of ADHD, a neurological condition that is often diagnosed in childhood and is characterized by a short attention span, an appearance of unlimited energy. Now, the adults at Abigail's school are very understanding, and even though she's given time out in a relaxing environment, Abigail just wants to join in with the rest of her classmates. The music teacher helps Abigail participate, and the final scenes in this book show a joyful collaboration as children make music together. Rose worked closely with Dr. Rebecca Butler when writing this book, and the wonderful music teacher, Miss Butler, is, I'm sure, named after her. Rose herself has autism and is an inclusion ambassador for Inclusive Minds. You can join me in conversation with Rose on the 15th of April, when we'll be looking at books with positive inclusion of neurally diverse characters. I wanted to just end my comments about this book with Rose's own words, and these are taken from the Book Trust website. She says, "No two people are the same, and that's the most beautiful thing about being human. Many of us spend our lives trying to be normal, and this is actually a waste of time. We should cherish and respect our own differences and those of others." Now, this book, Small's Big Dream by Manjeet Mann and illustrated by Amanda Quarty, is Manjeet's first picture book, though I'm sure many of you will know her prose books for her verse novels for teenagers. This is the story of a small girl who, in spite of her circumstances and restrictive spaces, thinks big. Dreams and inspiration can carry you a long way, and this story urges readers to keep on dreaming big and to claim their personal power. It's a life-affirming message for young readers from Manjeet, who is the Costa Award winner for 2021. And again, you can join me in conversation with Manjeet on Wednesday, the 4th of May, when we'll be having a special book blast on inclusivity. And for all of these book blast events, you can just use your usual book blast link or watch again later on YouTube or Facebook. Next is Bear's Guide to Beekeeping by Pip Cornell and Alex Griffiths. The guide in question is written from a bear's perspective, and it's great fun. The guide covers subjects from finding and catching bees to building a hive to house them. Bear follows the instructions assiduously, but the commentary from his little blue bird companion indicates that Bear may not really know what he's doing. Children will enjoy the humour derived from Bear's naivety. And there's potential, I think, for using this book as a model for a writing project. I mean, what about A Fox's Guide to Caring for Chickens, for example? Now, while the story is clearly fictitious, after all, you wouldn't really care for bees by reading them a bedtime story, would you? However, the end papers, they're different at the front and the back of the book, do provide some fascinating facts. I mean, who knew that bees really do sleep touching each other's feet? That's cute. We all need to take care of the bees for the sake of our planet. So do take a look at the collection of great books about bees that we have on the Best Books for Schools website. You just need to type in bees in the search and a few pages of bee books will crop up. Now, the next one is Bunnies in a Boat, and it's the riotous sequel to Bunnies on the Bus. During lockdown, Bunnies on the Bus was one of the titles that we at Just Imagine included in packs supplied to various charity efforts to get books into the hands of children who do not have books at home and were unable to access them. We have brilliant feedback about the book selection and this title in particular. And I think it's not surprising because there's no agenda here other than having a good time. There's no moral to this story either. The turbo speed romp is propelled along at pace by Ada's bouncy rhythm and Ben Mantle's dynamic illustration. I enjoyed spotting my favourite bunnies from the previous story, and I'm sure children will too. Like so many good picture books, the story begins on the title page. Notice those naughty bunnies pinching the key to the speedboat while the attendant is totally unawares. Notice too the minor characters in the boat, the pirate lobster and crab. It's these details that children love to spot and follow through the story. And it keeps multiple readings fresh for both adults and children. Bunnies at the jetty, bunnies at the jetty. They've gone and hit the restaurant and are covered in spaghetti. Great page actually for me talking to you from Bologna, where I'm about to go and have some spaghetti bolognese. What's wonderful here, obviously so much going on in the picture that we've already talked about, but look at that speedboat as it crashes through the restaurant and takes off into midair. And the two bears underneath who are totally unaware of the disaster happening around them. It's things like this, the dramatic irony, that will make this a really loved story. At the end of this book, we see the bunnies boarding a plane. So it looks as though we have bunnies on a plane to look forward to next. And I, for one, can't wait to see what pranks they get up to in midair. Elephant Island is another hit from Belgian illustrator Leo Timmers, published by Gecko Press. When seafaring elephant Arnold is shipwrecked, he finds himself adrift and alone, all alone on a wide, wide sea. Rescue comes from a variety of animals, first a mouse and then an old sea dog. However, their sailing craft are simply not large enough to accommodate an elephant. Arnold is not defeated. Arnold is a fixer. And with the wreckage of the various sailing craft, he builds a floating home which they can all enjoy together. Like Bunnies in a Boat, this is a playful story packed with child appeal. Look at the fabulous detail in this image. I imagine that it will inspire the imaginations of lots of little artists keen to invent their own fantastic creations. Super Silly Museums is a clever idea from Nick Sharratt. Inside the pages of this picture book, we have a collection of museums. Take this one, for instance, the Two-seum. When you open the page, you discover the contents of this museum. Everything is in pairs. Some things are identical, like the pair of maracas and a pair of skis and a pair of trouser legs. Interesting that we call this a pair of trousers when it's just one item of clothing. There's something interesting to talk about. Others are complementary, like the sun and the moon and the cup and the saucer. It may look just like a simple collection of pairs, but there's plenty here to talk about. Look closer, for example. There's a conventional image of a bride and groom. But a closer look on at the couples on this page, and we see two men riding a tandem, and the brides riding the camel challenge the heteronormative imagery that we're used to seeing in picture books. Other museums to explore include the Shoeseum, the Cuseum, and yes, the Pooseum. Don't assume that these books are only for younger readers. This book is only for younger readers. There's lots of linguistic humour, which will be appreciated by junior age children and by adults sharing the book with younger children. A completely different tone is set by Emma Chichester Clarke in her thoughtful book, Mr. Toots. The front cover design evokes a lovely old-fashioned cloth-bound book with buff boards and maroon spine. It's totally in keeping with the classic feel of this story. Mr. Toots is the small blue character that you see pictured on the cover. One day he arrives in a storm and is taken in by the dog family, also pictured here. They welcome him unconditionally into their home. They feed, house, and keep him warm. Soon he has made himself an integral part of the community. He's quiet, but he's a listener, and he starts to pick up the language. And then one day he runs away and he vanishes as quickly as he came. The family are bereft. I spoke to Emma Chichester Clarke about this gentle, affirming story, which can be read as a story about welcoming refugees into our communities, or a story about unconditional familial love. In the podcast we recorded, Emma also gives some interesting insights into the composition of her images. Listen to the podcast to learn more. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the usual podcast providers. There's something very joyful in this book, A Dress with Pockets by Lily Murray and illustrated by Jenny Lovely. Lucy and her elegant Aunt Augusta are dress shopping, and at the fabulous fashion store, there are dresses to suit just about everyone. There are fancy dresses, frilly dresses, stripy dresses, silly dresses, sundresses, fun dresses, blue dresses, green. But Lucy doesn't care about the frills or lace. She just wants a dress with pockets. And the reason? Well, Lucy likes finding insects and splashing in puddles and giving cuddles to beautiful shiny green frogs. So eventually, a dress with pockets is found. Lucy and her aunt both leave the shop with dresses with pockets. I love the fact that she's had this influence on her very manicured and elegant aunt. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper and his assistants are busy sewing pockets on all the dresses in the shops. Pockets, the best fashion statement ever. So The Comet is a beautiful new picture book from Jo Todd Stanton, published by Flying Eye. Through the window, we see a young girl with a woman that we assume to be her mother. Together, they marvel at the night sky, while the text simply says, "This is my home. Here the trees grow tall, and I can count 100 stars. We even saw a comet once." We infer that we're looking through the girl's bedroom window. We notice the things that surround her: 3 flying ducks symbolic of family and home, a glimpse of Matisse's Icarus on the bottom right corner, the boy who flew among the stars. But the mood changes when the girl and her father move to the city. Through the window, we see the city. Light pollution makes it hard to see the millions of stars. It's bleak and unwelcoming. The girl stands in her father's shadow with only his gaze and her cat offering comfort and hope. Until one night, the girl sees a comet in the stars. Following its path ignites magical memories. And when she returns home, a frenzy of creativity overtakes her. Her father joins in, and together they make a start on creating a new home. Subtle and beautiful, the story acknowledges feelings of loss, but celebrates the magic in life and love. Binet Schroeder is a longtime favourite illustrator of mine and one of Germany's foremost illustrators for children, particularly illustrating the fairy tale. In this story, Mr. Gray prefers an ordered life, no sudden surprises, no garish colours. Even his pet canary has turned grey. The only exception to his grey world is his little black cat. Mr. Gray lives next door to Frida Frolic, and she loves colour and flowers and singing. Poor Mr. Gray worries away at the thought of his neighbour's frivolity. Until one day, Frida Frolic visits her neighbour, and he notices that she has the most beautiful blue-grey eyes. As their relationship blossoms, Mr. Gray gradually acquires more colour, and his canary regains his yellow colour. Binet Schroeder, as I say, is famous for her fairy tale retellings, and here's an image taken from her gorgeous Beauty and the Beast. You can also find The Frog Prince is another one that she's done. And if you like fine art, you'll notice the links between Schroeder's dreamlike imagery and style with the famous surrealist painter Leonora Carrington. I've just put both side by side on a screen here so that you can see the connection between those two. The Garden We Share by Zoe Tucker, illustrated by Juliana Swanee, is published by North South Books. The little girl in this story has a special friend who happens to be much older. In spite of, or perhaps because of the age gap, they have a wonderful time together at the community garden with the old lady's friends. When they finish working in the garden, they lie in the sun and listen to the hum of the honeybees. Happy times are interrupted, however, when the old lady dies. At first, the little girl is sad, but the garden reminds her of her friend, and the other ladies rally round to comfort her. Growing and tending the garden brings some solace and healing. Swanee's palette of autumnal reds and oranges work at a metaphoric level, but they also add warmth to the story so that the reader never feels despair. I loved The Must-Have Mum. Imagine a mum who rummages through the rubbish tips looking for must-haves. Imagine a mum who can turn what other people think is rubbish into something to treasure. Imagine the sneering neighbour who thinks it's lowering the tone of the neighbourhood, and a little boy who wonders if he's good enough for his must-have mum. Of course, he is the most precious must-have of all. Beautifully told, and although it has an obvious green message, it doesn't feel at all worthy. And as you'll see from the picture, it's an inclusive text without being explicitly about inclusivity. Me in the Middle by Annette Demetriou and illustrated by Angela Mayers is published by Owlet Press. It's an interesting book for teachers, I think, because it presents a lesson about family trees and heritage. George's class is learning about where they come from. The teacher takes them into the playground where she has chalked a map of the world, and she asks them if they can find where they live, which they do. In the book, it refers to England, which may be intentional, though I did wonder if there was a reason not to refer to Great Britain. The teacher then asks the class if they can find where their parents come from. Some of them at this point move to different countries, but Georgie doesn't know where she belongs, so she sits down in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It looks as though things aren't going too well, but sensitive teaching and involvement of parents ensures that Georgie's story is as valued as anyone else's. This book could be an interesting conversation opener, but as always, it's important to know the backgrounds of the children in your class. Now, the latest book from John Agard and Satoshi Kitamura, published by Scallywag Press, highlights the importance of language for expressing feelings and building relationships. The creature of no words exists, but his life lacks purpose. And sometimes he has feelings that he just can't put into words. Instead, he beats his chest and thumps his head and looks into the clouds in frustration. The creature of words uses language to express how she feels. She's a happier soul because she can name her feelings. So when one creature meets another, how will it end? There's always a word that's just right for every situation, and the word for this one is hug. A story to read and reflect on. It's easy to relate the story to many situations, from the personal to the global. Talking is always the best solution, though it may not always be easy. With older readers, you might like to consider the pronoun choice. Do you think John Agard might intentionally have made the creature with words female? How would it affect the story if the pronouns were swapped? Counting and culture come together in this stunning companion to golden domes and silver lanterns. From one sun to countless stars, this gentle introduction to numbers also celebrates the many diverse traditions of the Muslim world. And here, just for you to get a feel of the quality of the illustrations, is one of the spreads, this one being for the number 4. So as we move further on with nonfiction, I wanted to introduce Factopia, in case you haven't already come across this series. There are now 2 books, the second one being Return to Factopia. This is a book of facts where each leads to another at the turn of the page. There are some surprising chained connections and plenty to keep children amused and interested. For instance, this page gives some facts about tall, referring to the 4-meter root systems of prairie grasses. At the bottom of the page, spot the mole who draws the eye from left to right, with the text, "How far down can we go?" Turning the page takes us to a fact about deep. I think children would be brilliant at creating their own Factopia style books, looking for chained events to write about and illustrate. Now, this one is personal. I'm passionate about vintage motorcycles, coming from a family of racers and speedway riders. This picture book biography is the true story of Beatrice Schilling, a brilliant engineer who lived in the first half of the 20th century. In fact, she was a racer herself, and you can see her pictured here on an early Norton. Unbelievably, when she won an important race, the journalists interviewing her suggested that the men had let her win. Beatrice's interest in how things work was evident from early childhood, and she was then mentored by an older woman, Miss Partridge, who urged Beatrice to attend university, which she did. It wasn't easy making her way in a male-dominated industry, and she always stood out as being different. But during the Second World War, she led a team that solved a problem with Spitfire engines cutting out when going into a dive. Most engineers thought there was a fuel supply problem, but Beatrice worked out that the carburettor was flooding. The straightforward text is brought to life with humour in the illustration to tell the story of this remarkable woman. Which leads us nicely into Women Who Led the Way, Great Explorers and Adventurers by Mick Manning and Britta Grandstrom. Told in the first person with additional fact boxes and some speech bubbles, the text is accessible and beautifully illustrated with engaging watercolour illustration. You can see Mick and Britta talking about this book on my YouTube channel. The book is arranged chronologically from the story of Viking seafarer Aud, who travelled across treacherous seas to Iceland in order to protect her family. And the most recent edition in this collection about brilliant women adventurers is Aronima Sina, who was attacked and thrown off a train, lost her leg, but with determination learned to climb with her new prosthetic limb and conquered Everest. Truly inspirational. Art historian Yanina Ramirez has a long fascination with goddesses, and in this handsomely produced volume by Nosy Crow in partnership with the British Museum, she brings the goddesses from religions around the world to the fore. In an interview with Louise Stoll recently, I asked her why there were so few Norse goddesses. There's Frigg and Freya, who might actually even be the same goddess. Louise' reply was interesting. She thinks that there were more originally, but that Christianity was the main reason that the goddesses have been lost and forgotten. Mami Wata, the river goddess, is one of my favourites, and I first came across her in the Ivory Coast. She was known through West Africa, and if you attended an audience with Yababedu, you'll know that the river goddess makes her appearance in Lionheart Girl. These vibrant illustrations are by Sarah Walsh. How to Make a Book is a detailed account of the creative and production processes involved in making a book. It highlights the teamwork needed to get a book to publication and then onto the bookshelves. The subject could be quite dry, but the appealing illustration and the touches of humour help things along. It's a book that I think would be enhanced through discussion, but even better if it could be used as a model for class bookmaking projects. You can decide which roles are needed and who will undertake them. Even better, I think, if there's an enterprise element. It is very comprehensive. The book talks about agents, editors, illustrators, art directors, the sales team, marketing, printers, distribution, publicity, events, influencers, booksellers, reviewers, and of course, readers. Now, Catherine Barr, somebody whose nonfiction I greatly admire, writes nonfiction to provoke curiosity and to encourage questioning rather than provide all the answers. The subtitle of this book, Protect Fresh Water to Save Life on Earth, explains why this book is so important. Only a small percentage of the water on Earth is fresh water, and we're not very good at taking care of it. I recently held a book launch with Catherine Barr and special guest Katie Olcott from Frank Water, and that's also been uploaded to my YouTube channel if you want to take a look. There's some Key Stage 2 planning available on TeachWire for this book too. And the illustrator Christiana Engel also spoke briefly in that event about one of the challenges of this book being the illustration of water in all of its moods and characters and contexts. So here we have a very polluted river Ganges. It also shows this spread, how text and illustration work together to provide so much more information than if you were relying on text alone, because there's so much detail here in the pictures. The book covers all the important topics, and as I say, a great text to illustration ratio that make this work well at the lower end of Key Stage 2. Amongst the topics included are the gender inequalities that arise from girls missing school in order to fetch water from long distances, making it essential that all villagers have access to pumped underground water. Well, lighthouses are certainly having their moments, and here are just a few books from our Lighthouses collection at Best Books for Schools. And again, if you type in lighthouses in the search, it will bring up several pages of books on a lighthouse theme. Now, this new book is a delightful story of a little girl who visits her grandfather, a lighthouse keeper, and learns the importance of looking after the light and all the jobs her grandfather must do to keep the ship safe. Just as I was thinking, yes, but I'm pretty sure it isn't like that today, I turned the page and found more factual information presented as a book within a book and filled with lots of details about modern lighthouses, including, for instance, information about their markings and their individuality. So there's lots in here, a blending of narrative and information. Animal BFFs. Yes, that's best friends forever. This book covers 3 of the 5 different types of symbiosis. There's mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. You can see the contents on the contents page there. And just to show you, this is how the pairs of animals are represented. There's 2 double page spreads devoted to each pairing. And this one here is hermit crabs and sea snails. And the first page is largely fantasy. You can see them talking with each other about why they like each other so much. But when you turn the page, you get more factual information in these fascinating facts boxes. I think that children will actually find this both engaging as well as informative. The Extraordinary World of Birds, written by David Lindo, who is the urban birder, and this is from Dorling Kindersley. The organisation of the book is good. It follows a logical sequence. What is a bird, bird families, bird behaviour, and birds and me? And it's certainly packed with lots of very interesting information. The presentation, I think, is dynamic and it is appealing. However, a word of caution, the layout is sometimes potentially confusing for a novice reader. For instance, on this page, hunting birds is the main information, and presented above it, there's a paragraph about habitats. That's quite key for this page. But because the eye roams around and you're not quite sure which bit to focus on in order to extract the most important information, that passage on or that section on habitats could be overlooked. Experienced readers will understand that these birds live in different habitats, but less experienced readers may think that they live together. And the relative size of birds is also, I think, a bit confusing. There's a very big bird on the left-hand side, and we're not quite sure how that relates to the other birds on this page. Nevertheless, I do want to say that there's plenty in this book to get your teeth into. Now, it does mention Archaeopteryx as the first bird, a theory that is less popular today since the discovery of new fossils in China about 10 years ago, which showed that there are lots of small feathery dinosaurs that were likely more closely related to avians. However, this is a good opening for teachers to read from more than one source and to look at competing theories, and it shows how science is constantly evolving. The Secret Signs of Nature, written by extreme wilderness survival and chief instructor at the Nature Reliance School. This book encourages children to become detectives in the wild. What can be discovered by looking at a tree stump or investigating a rock pool? Or perhaps watching the swell of the tide. Although this book takes a global view, all of these contexts can be related to a British wildlife, so it can be used as a guide for children to go out and spot and start to notice their environment. Grow is an aesthetically pleasing book that will appeal as much to adults as it will to children. I think it's a good book for sharing, and children are likely to get more from it when engaging in conversation with an adult. The content page shows that the book is organised around 15 hero plants and fungi. There are herbs, flowers, fruit, trees, and grasses represented. Great attention has been paid to the look and feel, and it's been produced with high production values. The layout makes it clear to follow the text too. It's informative and very pretty. Rodan Al-Ghalidi is a Dutch writer of Iraqi descent. A trained engineer, he fled his native Iraq and settled in the Netherlands in 1998. Al-Ghalidi writes both prose and poetry in Dutch, a language he taught himself. In this collection, he's gathered stories that he remembers from his childhood and rewritten them in his own style. You may recognize the word Serendip from the subtitle, The Three Princes of Serendip and Other Stories. Serendip is actually a place in ancient Sri Lanka, and in 1754, the historian Horace Walpole coined the word serendipity. The word was suggested to him by this very story because the three heroes are always making discoveries by accident. The collection is sumptuously designed, and you can see that it's full of the most gorgeous paper cutout collages. You get a sense of it from this slide, but you really need to have a look at the finished book to get a true sense of their beauty. A World Full of Nature Stories by Angela McAllister. It has a classic storytelling voice, and the whole collection has a traditional feel. 50 stories covering every continent are anthologized. We have stories like from the Inuit, like The First Fog. There's the story of winter and summer from Mongolia, Idun and the Golden Apples from Scandinavia, The King Who Wanted to Touch the Moon from the Dominican Republic, and The First Buffalo from Vietnam, and many others. Some of the stories are very short, making this a good collection for teachers to have available for those odd moments when you can reach for a short story collection. Michael Morpurgo's Muck and Magic is a reissue of a previously published short story. This version, illustrated by Olivia Lominette-Gill, is now available in paperback. Bonnie wants to be an Olympic cyclist and follow in the footsteps of her cycling hero, perhaps even become an Olympic champion. An accident on her bicycle leads to a chance encounter with an old lady who creates sculptures of horses. It turns out that the old lady is the famous sculptor and printmaker Elizabeth Frink, coincidentally, one of Olivia Nominet-Gill's long life inspirations. It's a lovely, gentle book, which I think would benefit most from being read in class. So this series, which I hadn't read any of before, so this is a new discovery for me, and I'm always on the lookout for books that work well with that transition from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2. These are adventurous stories with a bit of magic, but no fairies, unicorns, or sparkles. The Playdate adventurers are on a mission to save the world, and in this latest episode, they have to solve the problem of the water holes drying out. They're 112 pages long, large font, and black and white line illustrations throughout, but there is some challenging language, so probably a good read for 6+, but most likely to be best placed in lower junior classes. Amy Durning, in a review for Just Imagine, says, this wonderful, entertaining chapter book introduces young children to issues of climate change and its impact on the planet. The Great Safari Rescue is a celebration of friendship, courage, and collaboration. How to Steal the Mona Lisa by Bethany Walker and illustrated by Jack Noel. Mia loves art, but the government is threatening cuts to art education. The art department in Mia's school is shut down. No art teacher, no art equipment, no art lessons, no chance for Mia to study her favourite subject. And then the royal family offers a £25 million reward for the return of the world's most famous painting, the Mona Lisa, which has been missing for 200 years. Told through email exchanges, newspaper articles, online posts, this is the story about an art heist with a code to crack. And do read the author's note at the end of the book too. This slide is really just to give you a flavour of the lookout, of the layout, so that you can get a sense of how illustration is integrated in the overall design. Now, I love Sophie Henn and the Pizzazz series. So Pizzazz is a 9.5-year-old superhero, and in this latest book, she has to face not one but 5 demons, and this is on account of a superpower duplicator. How does the device actually work? Well, that's what Pizzazz must find out, and what you need to find out too by reading the book. One thing is certain, however, that there's always an urgent need for an unlimited source of snacks to help things along. And again, just to give you an insight into the layout of this book, which combines narrative with this graphic novel look. The Last Firefox by Lee Newberry is a debut, and it's a magical fantasy adventure. Charlie Challoner is bullied at school, and he's not very brave. But when a magical firefox is thrust into his arms by a visitor from another world, Charlie must learn to protect the creature from its hunters. The firefox's story mirrors Charlie's story, and it's a way for him to come to terms with his own problems. Lee Newberry, I think, is definitely one to watch. Katie Cotton's The Secret of Splint Hall is set at the end of the Second World War, and you can hear her talking about this fascinating period in a podcast that we made recently. Sisters Isabel and Flora have lost their home in the bombing, and their father has been killed in the fighting. And so, with their mother, they're returning to the family ancestral home, now owned by their aunt and her husband. There's lots for the girls to explore in this old house and its gardens. Then they discover mysterious goings on in an old air raid shelter and the surrounding caves, which bring them face to face with an ancient magic and mythology. What are the creatures threatening Splint Hall, and how will they be vanquished? Dreadwood is a new series from Jennifer Killick. When classmates Angelo, the narrator, Hallie, Gustav and Naira are forced to come to school on a Saturday, they think things can't get much worse. But they're wrong. Things are about to get seriously scary. What has dragged their teacher underground? Why do the creepy caretakers keep humming to the tune Itsy Bitsy Spider? And what horrors lurk in the shadows, getting stronger and meaner every minute? There's so much more to this horror than jump scares, but there are certainly some good ones in the story. If you're watching this video before the 29th of March, do join me for an evening with Jennifer Killick, where we'll be discussing the point of horror. The furthermore of the title in this book by Darren Simpson is a world into which 12-year-old Bren escapes when life is simply too overwhelming. Bren's younger sister has died, and his parents are coping with their own grief, and Bren is being bullied at school. It's all very bleak. However, things are happier in Furthermore, and it's a place where Evie lives on. In this world, Bren is in control, and through the power of his imagination and creativity, Furthermore is a beautiful refuge. But then things take a turn for the worse, and fantasy starts to mirror reality, as it often does. Think about Catherine Storr's Marianne Dreams, or Jenny McLaughlin's Land of Raw, or even C.S. Lewis in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I really appreciate Darren's beautifully crafted prose, and he's on my heads up list whenever a new novel comes out. I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez is a brilliant YA read. Originally published in the US, where it was shortlisted for the National Book Award, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter is published in the UK by Rock the Boat. It's the story of Julia Reyes, who, as the quote on screen suggests, is not the perfect Mexican daughter. That role was assigned to her sister Olga. But then Olga is tragically killed, and that changes everything. Julia's parents are quick to find fault with just about everything she does, and the teen struggles to cope with their expectations and her own grief and mental health needs. As Julia uncovers the secrets her recently deceased older sister Olga left behind, she comes face to face with unsettling truths about her family's past. The most arresting thing about this story is the acerbic voice of the bright teenager for whom Sanchez drew on her own experience of growing up in America with Mexican migrant parents. The opening chapter, where she's looking at her sister laid out in a coffin and commenting on what she sees and feels, is most unconventional and completely unforgettable. And so to some poetry. Previously published as a poem, John Agard's Windrush Child is now beautifully re-envisioned as a picture book. Between 1948 and 71, thousands of adults travelled from the Caribbean to the UK to help rebuild the country after the Second World War. They've become known as the Windrush generation, after the ship that brought the first migrants. While some intended to return to the Caribbean, many stayed. And in his author's notes, John writes, when they arrived in Britain, they discovered a country that was different to their Caribbean home. It was sometimes hard to find jobs or even a safe place to live. But despite many challenges, including racism, they went on to build strong communities. Friends were made, stories shared, and unfairness challenged. Caribbean culture had a powerful and positive impact on British culture, and Britain is a much better place because of it. Behind you, Windrush child, palm trees wave goodbye. Above you, Windrush child, seabirds asking why. Around you, Windrush child, blue water rolling by. It's the positive message that pervades this book through words, colour and imagery. And although there are subtle hints of tensions in the illustration, the overall tone is an optimistic one. The illustrator Sophie Bass has mixed British and Trinidadian heritage, and she's a BA illustration graduate from Falmouth. The illustrations are hand-rendered using gouache and pen, and they're inspired by music, social justice, mythology, and symbolism. She has a very strong visual voice, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she does next. Deborah Batulis' new collection, Where Do Wishes Go?, is a really good collection for the classroom. It's full of lovely poems covering a wide range of subjects and mood. You've got one on the screen to give you a flavour. Had I got more time, I would have read you Cloud Poem, because I think it has many important things to say about teaching. She Will Soar, collected by Anna Sampson, is now available in paperback, and it's certainly earned its place as a great new recommended read for National Poetry Day. I'm going to end with this poem by Michaela Morgan, Freedom Poem. Breathe in, breathe out, gasp, sigh, scream, shout, spread your arms wide and smile. Find yourself, find your style. Make yourself tall as tall can be. Do the impossible. 1 time, 2 times, 3, and say out loud, I am free. That's all for March. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll come back for Book Blast April. You can join the live session where there are chances to take away all of the books that are mentioned in the presentation, or of course you can watch later on YouTube or Facebook. Bye for now.